Well, to discuss the situation, we can cross live to activist Yvonne Gougelet in Florida now. Yvonne, thank you for joining us on the programme. Tell us, how have people been protesting in Florida?
Yes, hello. There have been major protests in Tampa, where I'm based, and there was a presence in Miami, Florida, and Jacksonville. There's been a large turnout yesterday, and I think they're going to continue on today as well.
How would you assess the police response to the protests there?
Well, Miami in particular, in my personal experience, in the free trade riots back in 2003, the military has, it seems as if the military has trained and armed the police. There's kind of this, there isn't like a line between the two. There were tanks in Tampa last night. So you think of a police officer as somebody that's working for the community, protecting and serving with a baton, a taser. But last night there were tanks out in full force in Tampa and in Miami. That's quite scary to see here in America.
We're seeing a lot of what start out as peaceful protests descending to violence. We've seen looting, we've seen arson. Do you think this is the right way to get your message across?
It's a really complex question to answer, in my personal opinion, especially because I am a white woman, to be quite honest. It's not really my say in the matter. I did witness looting happen yesterday during the day in broad daylight. It was the first time I've ever witnessed looting happen at a protest in the 19 years that I've been attending protests and documenting protests. But there's no way to control millions of people across the country and have one uniform way to behave when you are defending your life. At the end of the day, these protesters are literally begging for their lives, and you can't control and tell people how to behave in that kind of situation. It's their survival instincts. And if somebody's going to go off and want to be a rebel and cause a little destruction, you know, I'm not defending them, but at the same time, it's really, really hard to pass judgment unless you yourself are literally walking in their shoes. And I think that as a white woman, I don't personally believe that I have the right to judge anybody that is involved in this movement and how they're behaving.
Absolutely. Do you think there's a possibility, though, or a chance that these peaceful protests are being hijacked by opportunists?
Yes, 100%. At the end of the day, these protests are starting as rallies in public parks with children and parents and families of all ages. And it's an open community of people who have lived through the civil rights movement, people who want to see change, who are desperate for change. And they start peaceful. They start with prayer. They start with reading the names of the people who've been murdered and by the police, unarmed, innocent people. And then after the rally, they go off and they march. And when people start marching and taking over the streets, which is very liberating and very empowering to take the streets and take a stand, it can get very chaotic, and you can cause traffic and you can cause people to get angry, and that's when it gets very chaotic. And that's when there's a couple people in the crowd that want to be an instigator. And what I witnessed yesterday in Tampa, Florida was, and as I've witnessed at protests across the country, it's always a few people who want to kind of cause a little chaos, and then it kind of escalates. And yeah, so
yeah, it all comes at such an intense time for the US, doesn't it? Because you've got the country gripped by the pandemic as well, when people should be observing social distancing. Do you think that's an afterthought now?
Well, it's really a bizarre situation that we've had in America, because our president started this pandemic by claiming that it was potentially a DNC hoax. So he kind of started this whole thing off by acting as if it wasn't a serious situation. We're getting a lot of mixed signals from our government. I've taken it very seriously. There's been 100,000 reported deaths in America in the past several months. So we've all been taking it very seriously, but apparently we've flattened the curve. And so now businesses are slowly starting to open up. It's a crazy time to be out and protesting in mobs of people during a global pandemic. But at the end of the day, you know, we were all wearing masks, and we felt the call to stand up and stand with our brothers and sisters in solidarity. And in many ways, it's, you know, we're putting our life on the line to make a stand, to have our voices be heard. You know, going and standing in front of police, riot police, with rubber bullets and tanks and tear gas and mace. We're already putting our lives essentially on the line. So it's a very complex time. It's a scary time. There's a lot of thought that maybe this is kind of orchestrated in some manner. I know that goes off into some conspiracy realms, and I don't want to go there, but now the government's gonna, you know, we have a quarantine and curfews, and now the National Guard is out, and that was what our fears were in the beginning of the quarantine. So, like, an opportunistic time to take advantage of citizens and have us on curfew, but with military presence. It's been a great fear for Americans for a long time, in my personal experience.
Of course, and in, you know, not observing the curfew, you're taking a risk, and also putting yourself in these protests with the heavy-handed, sometimes heavy-handed police presence. You're putting yourself in harm's way. Is it worth it? Are you going to continue protesting?
I think it's absolutely worth it at the end of the day. I personally believe that it's the least that I can do as a white woman. I will never have to walk the streets living in fear of getting murdered by the police in broad daylight for being just a suspect in any kind of random potential crime. I think it's the least that white citizens can do to participate and stand with our brothers and sisters who live in fear every single day. I personally believe that it's worth it. For some reason, the pandemic was an afterthought, and you're really just kind of making me realize that now. I think watching the video of George Floyd, if it didn't, the murder of George Floyd, if it didn't spark any kind of empathy and wanting to be involved and stand with our brothers and sisters. I mean, the officer sat on him for 7 minutes, and then he passed, and then he died. He became lifeless, and then that officer stayed on him for another 2 minutes. He knew what he was doing. You could see it in his eyes. The officer knew that he was being recorded. George was begging for his life. He was crying, saying he was dying and that he couldn't breathe. And the officer, you could see it in his eyes that that officer knew exactly what he was doing. We can't keep allowing horrific deaths like that to happen time and time and time again, and just let it go and not do anything about it.
Yvonne Gougelet, activist from Florida, thank you for joining us on the programme. We appreciate it.